They said she was just a widow, a quiet woman in gray, tending to a modest patch of Georgia clay. But beneath that silence, beneath the smell of cotton and blood baked into the summer air, she was building something that no one, not even God, was meant to witness. Every man she bought was chosen. Every night she summoned them was recorded. And every secret she kept was carved into a ciphered book buried beneath her own bed. The plantation called Moss Creek was no ordinary field of labor. It was an altar. And the woman who ruled it was not mourning her dead husband. She was performing her own form of resurrection. The year was 1840, when society still worshipped power dressed in piety. Georgia's elite held church on Sundays and sold human lives on Mondays. But among them lived Eleanor Creswell, a name whispered only in private letters and burned sermons. She didn't inherit Moss Creek to sustain it. She inherited it to dismantle what it represented, from the inside out. To the men who came to buy her cotton, she was a curiosity. A woman managing land, commanding slaves, speaking of yield and efficiency like any man. But behind the locked doors of her 2-story timber house, she was performing something older than business. Each transaction was a ritual, each man a symbol, each sale a message written in flesh. And when the ledger was opened, those men were not listed by skill or strength, but by features, eyes, skin, the curve of a jaw. She was mapping bloodlines, the hidden veins that tied Georgia's purest families to the very race they enslaved. Her plantation wasn't a farm. It was a reckoning. So when a Charleston broker stumbled upon the coded words, "Prime Condition Certified," in 1857, he thought he'd found evidence of good breeding stock. But what he'd really found was the beginning of a confession written in corpses. And if you're still here, listening, then you've already begun to feel it. That uneasy pressure behind your chest. The whisper that tells you you're about to learn something you were never meant to hear. They said she prayed before every selection. Not to the God her neighbors knew, but to something far older. Something that demanded silence, not hymns. Eleanor would stand barefoot in her parlor, the shutters drawn, a silver cross in her left hand, and her late husband's Bible in her right. Only, when you opened that Bible, the verses were carved out. In their place, pages of hand-drawn symbols, names, and birth dates written in the dark ink of crushed berries and iron. Each name was a man. Each name, a purchase. Each man, a piece of her design. That first night, the one the journals later called the Covenant, began like any other inspection. The overseer brought in a new arrival, young, broad-shouldered, terrified. The others said she walked around him like a priest around a sacrifice, measured his jawline, studied his eyes, then dismissed the overseer and locked the door. No one saw what happened inside, but in the morning, she emerged in the same gray dress. Though something had changed. She no longer wore her wedding band, and the man was gone. That evening, she gathered the house servants and spoke with that strange, cold precision that made people obey before they even understood why. She told them, "From this day, Moss Creek will not trade in flesh for profit. We will trade it for proof." The servants nodded, but no one dared to ask. Proof of what? By the next harvest, her cotton yields had doubled. By the next year, 3 of her male workers had vanished. Sold, she claimed, to buyers out of Louisiana. But the ledgers told a different story. Their names were crossed out in red, replaced with strange marks that resembled family crests. Sigils taken from the rings of the white men she dined with at church. It was as if she was collecting bloodlines, connecting the forbidden to the righteous, binding the oppressor and the oppressed into one lineage. A living contradiction. And those who worked beneath her swore that at night, when the house was silent, they could hear her voice echoing through the halls, reciting scripture backward, calling out names that no longer belong to this world. When Daniel Harrington stepped off his carriage at the gates of Moss Creek, the air itself seemed to hesitate. The plantation was quiet, too quiet for harvest season. The cicadas had fallen silent. The fields stood motionless, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Eleanor Creswell greeted him with that same stillness. Her composure was a kind of weapon, unblinking, unyielding. She led him through the house like a curator showing a collection. Every step rehearsed, every object exactly where it needed to be. But behind the order, Daniel felt something else. The faint hum of calculation. She offered him tea in a porcelain cup, etched with the initials TC. Her late husband's, supposedly. Daniel noticed the tiniest chip on its rim, a detail Eleanor surely saw every morning but never repaired. He wondered if the imperfection comforted her, or if it reminded her of what she had broken long ago. They sat in the parlor, surrounded by ledgers. She claimed they contained nothing more than inventories, cotton yields, livestock, expenses. Yet one lay open to a page that didn't match the others. Numbers were replaced by symbols, spirals, triangles, crosses drawn in red ink, a language disguised as accounting. Daniel asked permission to examine it more closely. Eleanor smiled faintly, the smile of a woman who has already prepared for every question. "You're looking for cruelty, Mr. Harrington," she said. "But you won't find it in whips or chains. The real cruelty is arithmetic, the way they measure a human life as profit and loss." He glanced at the column marked Prime Condition Certified. She noticed his hesitation and leaned forward. "Do you know what that means?" she whispered. "It means I learned to speak their language so I could bury a truth inside it. These books don't record my crimes, Mr. Harrington. They record theirs." That night, when Daniel was shown to H.O.T., his guest room, he couldn't sleep. Beneath the floorboards, he heard faint movement, the sound of drawers opening, metal scraping against wood. Somewhere below, a door creaked open, then closed. He lit his candle and followed the noise down the hall. At the far end of the corridor, behind a faded portrait of Thomas Creswell, he found it, a narrow stairway descending into the dark, and from below came the sound of whispering, not in English, but in the same coded rhythm he had seen in the ledger upstairs. The stairway was narrow and uneven, carved straight into the clay beneath the house. Daniel held his candle low, its light trembling across the walls. The air grew colder with each step, and a strange metallic scent clung to it. Iron, ink, and dust. At the bottom waited a single wooden door reinforced with rusted nails. On its surface, burned into the grain, was a symbol he recognized from Eleanor's ledger, a spiral enclosed by 3 triangles. He hesitated. A rational part of him whispered to turn back, to leave this place and write a polite report that would satisfy his editors. But curiosity is the most dangerous form of hunger. He pressed his hand against the door. It opened without a sound. The room beyond was not a cellar. It was a sanctuary of records. Hundreds of ledgers filled the walls, stacked with impossible precision. Every book was bound in black leather and labeled with a single name written in gold leaf. A table stood in the center. Upon it, a map of Georgia covered in pins and threads, red lines connecting plantations, blue lines marking bloodlines. In the corner, a small oil lamp flickered beside a glass jar filled with quills. Each one was tagged with a date. Each one was darkened at its tip, as if dipped in something thicker than ink. Daniel whispered, "What is this?" Eleanor's voice drifted from behind him. "The archive," she said. "The story beneath the story. Every man who called himself master left a trace. Papers, portraits, letters to mistresses he denied in public. I have gathered them all. They built their world on a lie, and I am writing its obituary." She stepped into the lamplight, her eyes reflecting the flame. "You came here to expose me. But tell me, Mr. Harrington, what will you do when you learn that your own family's name threads through this map?" That the system you condemn also fed your fortune. Daniel felt the weight of her. Words settle on him like chains. He looked closer at the map and saw it. His surname, faintly written in the margin beside Savannah, connected by a thin red thread to Moss Creek. Eleanor closed the ledger she held and placed it on the table between them. "No one leaves this room unchanged," she said. "You can burn the plantation or you can burn the illusion. Choose carefully. Only one of them ever truly dies." Daniel didn't remember leaving the cellar. One moment the map burned in his vision. Red threads webbed through every county like veins of infection. The next he was back in his room, staring at his own shaking hands. They smelled of iron and candle wax. A single question pulsed behind his eyes. How long had this been hidden in plain sight? Outside, night pressed against the windows. The plantation slept, but its silence felt staged, rehearsed, like actors holding their breath between scenes. Daniel lit another candle and opened his notebook. He meant to record what he'd seen, but every time his pen touched paper, the words dissolved into nonsense. The symbols from Eleanor's ledgers kept surfacing instead, unbidden, arranging themselves into patterns that seemed to move when he blinked. A knock at the door. It was Eleanor again, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been awake for hours," she said softly. "The archive has that effect." Daniel forced a thin smile. "It's a labyrinth of madness," he said. "Madness?" She tilted her head. "No, it's arithmetic, Mr. Harrington. You came here believing history is written in textbooks. It's written in transactions. Every field, every ledger, every birth and death. Someone profited. And the books balance only when blood fills the columns." She handed him one of the cups. It trembled slightly in his grasp. "You built this to expose them?" he asked. "I built it so someone would finally look," she replied. "Do you see the pattern now? The same families who financed the ships, the auctions, the wars. They wrote your constitution. Their sons became bankers. Their grandsons sit in parliaments and pulpits. The names never vanish. They just change address." Daniel set the cup down. "And you think unveiling this will cleanse anything?" Eleanor's expression didn't shift. "Cleansing is a myth. Revelation is the only weapon left. The can." Dull light flickered, throwing their shadows across the wall. 2 figures merging into one dark shape. Daniel realized he couldn't tell whose outline swallowed whose. That night he dreamed of ledgers breathing like lungs, of pages turning themselves, of voices whispering figures that added up to every atrocity the South had buried. When he woke, the map was pinned to his wall, though he hadn't moved it there, and one new thread had been added, stretching north toward Boston. By the time dawn broke, Daniel's resolve felt hollow. The ride into town should have taken an hour. It felt like a lifetime spent between fog and memory. Moss Creek receded behind him, but its silence clung to his coat. The map's image stayed burned in his mind. The threads, the names, the truth too vast to contain. The train depot at Augusta was already crowded when he arrived. Merchants barked over freight, soldiers smoked on the platform, newsboys shouted headlines about trade and tariffs. Normal life throbbed all around him, as if the world above had never heard the whispers beneath its floorboards. Daniel checked into a hotel and locked the door. He unpacked the ledger he'd taken from the archive, one small volume among hundreds. Inside were the same sigils and notations, but now he noticed faint watermarks behind the ink, embossed seals from banks, insurance houses, even northern universities. The handwriting changed from page to page, yet every entry ended with the same elegant signature, E.C. He thought of Eleanor's parting words. The names never vanish, they just change address. That evening, he met an editor from Boston at the Public House, a man who once praised Daniel for cutting through Southern myth with Northern reason. Daniel laid the ledger on the table. "Here," he said, "proof that the plantations were only one limb of something larger. The merchants, the banks, the colleges, they're all listed here. The editor's face froze, polite but vacant. He didn't even glance at the pages. "You shouldn't have brought this," he murmured. "Some stories don't want to be told." Daniel felt a cold current move through him. "You mean can't be told?" "No," the editor said quietly. "Shouldn't. You publish this, you'll erase more than names. You'll erase trust, in law, in commerce, in country, and none of them will forgive you." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Daniel spent the next 2 days wandering Augusta like a man divided between two worlds, the visible and the whispered. Every face in the crowd seemed to hide an awareness he didn't share. Every handshake lingered too long. Every passing glance felt like a question unspoken. He couldn't forget Eleanor's message. Every truth has its custodian. By the third night, curiosity outweighed fear. He traced the wax seal spiral to a crest he'd seen before, in the corner of one of Eleanor's ledgers. It belonged not to a plantation or a bank, but to something older, the Order of the Ledgermen, a secret network of auditors, accountants, and record keepers who operated beneath governments, beneath churches, men who never appeared in portraits, but whose signatures marked the foundation of empires. Their stated purpose, in the few surviving mentions Daniel could find, was to preserve the purity of account between man and God. But the deeper he read, the clearer it became. They didn't preserve accounts. They amended them. They rewrote debt into doctrine, theft into enterprise, atrocity into history. One of the names on their founding list froze Daniel's blood. Harrington, his own ancestor, a shipping investor who'd supposedly built the family fortune through trade. But the archive's map now made sense. The red thread running north to Boston wasn't symbolic. It was hereditary. That night, Daniel received another letter slipped under his door. No words this time, only a train ticket stamped for Savannah, and a single line scrawled in pencil. "The custodian will meet you where the first debt was written." He boarded the train at dawn, the ledger hidden under his coat. As the countryside passed by, he noticed something unsettling. Every station name along the route matched one of the entries in Eleanor's map. He wasn't traveling away from Moss Creek. He was following its routes. Near M. The old man's words hung in the mist like smoke. "The day we taught men to count souls as currency." Daniel felt the weight of them settle deep in his chest. He followed the man down a narrow dirt path that wound toward an abandoned chapel half swallowed by vines. The wood was gray, the windows boarded. Only the bell tower stood intact, a crooked finger pointing at the indifferent stars. Inside, hundreds of ledgers were stacked on the pews, centuries of records. Each bore the same insignia, the spiral within 3 triangles. The air smelled of mildew, ink, and something older, like parchment and grief. "This is where it began," the man said, lighting a lantern. The plantation system wasn't the first economy built on bondage. It was just the most visible. The first debt was spiritual before it was financial. He guided Daniel to the altar. There lay a single open book, its pages yellowed and brittle. The ink was brown with age. Across the top, written in Latin, Daniel could barely read. "Credita anime," the account of souls. The man turned the page carefully. Every entry listed not amounts, but names, millions of them, handwritten across centuries. Names erased from history, bought and sold as abstractions, their existence reduced to the balance between guilt and gain. Some names had small marks beside them, crosses, triangles, or spirals. The same symbols from Eleanor's ledger. Daniel whispered, "Who kept this? Who started it?" The man looked up slowly. "A priest, a banker, and a landowner. They met right here in 1712. The church sanctified debt. The banker measured it. The landowner enforced it. From that trinity came everything, the trade routes, the laws, even your family's fortune." Daniel stared at the book, his pulse thundering in his ears. There, halfway down the first page, was the name Harrington. Next to it, a spiral. He felt suddenly cold. "You're telling me Wambo." The tolling of the bell followed Daniel out of the chapel. Each note carried a vibration that seemed to reach into his bones. shaking something loose that wasn't entirely his own. He stumbled through the mist until the sound faded into silence, but the echo remained, a pulse beneath his skin, like the rhythm of an unseen clock counting down. By dawn, he was back in Savannah. The city was waking, carts clattering, vendors shouting, church bells ringing in ordinary time. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every steeple reminded him of the chapel, every ledgered shopfront of the archive. The whole city felt like a living equation, every brick mortared with some forgotten transaction. He found a telegraph office and wired Eleanor at Moss Creek. Found the custodian. Learned of first debt. Need guidance. He waited the entire day for a reply. None came. As night fell, he checked into a small inn near the waterfront. The walls were thin. From the room next door, he heard someone whispering numbers, repeating them as if in prayer. 17, 12, 17, 12. Over and over that same year. He banged on the wall, but the whisper didn't stop. When he finally stepped into the hallway, the door to that room was wide open. Empty. Only a single candle burned on the floor beside a black ledger. On its open page, he saw his name written in fresh ink. Beneath it, balance pending. He dropped the book, but the ink began to spread, crawling across the floor like veins of oil. The candle flickered out, and in the darkness Daniel saw faces in the ink, faces of men, women, children, staring, waiting. The ledger had recorded them, but not released them. Every unpaid life, every buried truth, had found a voice. Then another sound rose, beneath the whispering, paper turning, hundreds of pages, as if the archive itself had awakened. From the window, Daniel saw the harbor lights flicker and die. The city. The candle burned low, its wax pooling like blood across the desk. Daniel sat motionless before the ledger. The covenant opened between him and Eleanor like a wound that refused to close. Outside, the rain had stopped, but thunder still murmured over the horizon. The storm pacing, waiting. He looked down at the names on the parchment. Each one was written with immaculate precision, the ink dark and glossy as if freshly spilled. His father's signature shimmered at the top. His own space waited beneath, blank and expectant, a silence that demanded an answer. "What happens if I sign?" Daniel asked. Eleanor's voice was quiet, careful. "If you sign, you take ownership. You rewrite the record, claim every debt, every sin, and reconcile them in your name. It would end the archive's hunger, for a time. And if I refuse," she hesitated, "then it will choose another custodian, and you will watch history devour itself again, a cycle without end." Daniel rose from his chair and began pacing the room. "You talk like this thing is alive." Eleanor met his gaze. "It is, because we kept feeding it with memory, with guilt, with belief. Do you think the past stays buried just because we stop speaking of it? Every unspoken truth festers until it learns to whisper on its own." She opened another ledger, this one smaller and older. Inside were sketches, maps, birth records, letters of sale, all intertwined with the same recurring symbols. But beneath the layers of ink, Daniel saw something new emerging. Shapes of faces, faint outlines rising like ghosts from the parchment. "They want to be seen," Eleanor said. "That's what the archive is, a mirror made of everything we tried to forget." Daniel sat again, his pulse pounding. "And if I rewrite it, if I sign, how do I know what I'm rewriting into existence?" Eleanor leaned closer, her expression unguarded for the first time. "You don't. That's the cost of authorship. Creation is just destruction with better handwriting." The words struck him like lightning. All his life, Daniel had believed the law was clarity. That truth, once uncovered, would set the record straight. But now he understood the terrible paradox. To rewrite the debt was to become what he had hunted. The recorder, The arbiter. The new custodian. Outside, the wind shifted. The candle flared, its flame turning blue. The pages of the ledgers rustled though no hand touched them. Eleanor's face was pale in the glow. "It's begun," she whispered. "The archive's choosing." Daniel looked down. His name had begun to appear on the parchment, ink forming itself, letter by letter. He reached for the quill. And at that instant, he realized he wasn't the only one signing. The quill trembled between Daniel's fingers, its tip glistening as if it had already tasted ink. Across the covenant, the empty space beside his name filled itself, a second signature curling upward from the parchment like smoke. The strokes were deliberate, graceful, almost human. But the letters were wrong. They shifted each time he blinked, rearranging themselves into new names, new generations, the handwriting of every person who had ever profited or perished beneath the first debt. Eleanor's voice came as a whisper. "It's the archive itself. It's signing back." The candlelight flared and dimmed, the room pulsing like a heartbeat. The other ledgers stacked on the floor began to stir, their pages turning in unison. A sound rose. Faint, rhythmic, 1,000 pens scratching at once. The walls breathed. The floorboards ticked with invisible steps. Daniel tried to pull the quill away, but it wouldn't release his hand. A single drop of ink slid down his wrist, black and warm as blood. The letters on the page glowed faintly, binding the two signatures together. "Eleanor, what's happening?" She stepped forward, her face pale and determined. "It's taking the balance from both of us. It doesn't care about guilt or innocence. It only wants completion. That's what the archive feeds on. Closure." Daniel felt something pulling inside his chest, like memory unraveling. Scenes flashed before his eyes. Cotton fields, auction houses, boardrooms, banks. The entire lineage of debt and profit flashing in reverse, burning backward through time. He saw men whose faces mirrored his own, signing ledgers, shaking hands, passing fortunes down like a curse. Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Focus on the ink. You can steer it. Write something different." He looked at her, disoriented. "Different how?" "Don't record," she said. "Rewrite. Don't balance their books. Break them." The quill responded to his thoughts. The ink thickened, forming new words across the covenant. Words he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Equations turning into confessions, profit turning into names, debt transforming into memory. The floor began to shake. The ledger screamed, not aloud, but inside his mind, the chorus of centuries collapsing. Then, as suddenly as it began, the candle went out. Silence. Only the smell of iron and smoke remained. When Daniel opened his eyes, the room was gone. He stood alone in an endless corridor lined with doors, each one marked with a single date. Behind them, faint voices murmured, pleading, bargaining. At the far end stood Eleanor, holding one of the ledgers, her silhouette bathed in a dim golden light. "You've crossed the threshold," she said. "Now the archive is inside you." Each door whispered his name as he passed. Not Daniel, but every name he had ever been. Every version of himself that history had written in its own hand. Some voices were pleading. Others were accusing. All of them were fragments of the same story, the one that had begun long before his birth. He reached the first door, marked 1840, the year Eleanor inherited Moss Creek. The wood was warm beneath his fingertips, pulsing faintly. When he pushed it open, light flooded out, and the sound came with it. Not screams, not music, something in between. The rhythm of labor, the sound of fields breathing beneath chains. Inside, he saw not scenes but sensations, a living memory uncoiling from the walls. Eleanor stood over a grave, her hands trembling as she covered the earth. A child cried from somewhere beyond the frame. And then, as if the memory could sense him watching, her head turned. But her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were his. Daniel stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. Eleanor appeared beside him in the corridor, her face calm, almost tender. "It shows what it needs to," she said softly. "The archive is not a record. It's a mirror. It rewrites you as you read it." He clenched his fists. "Then what's real? Any of this?" She smiled faintly. "Reality is what survives revision." As they walked deeper, the doors grew newer. 1861, 1913, 1933, 2008. Each marked with an era of collapse and creation. Each one a reckoning disguised as progress. Behind one door, he heard the crackle of fire and the chanting of crowds. Behind another, the hum of machines counting digital currency, the rhythm identical to the whip. Daniel realized the archive never ended. It only updated. The plantation had become a corporation, the overseer a banker, the ledger an algorithm. The form changed, but the structure remained. The same math of control, evolving with time. Ned to Eleanor. "Then none of them ever ended the system. They just changed its name." She nodded. "That's why it must be rewritten from inside." "How?" "By remembering what they forced the world to forget. That profit was built from people, not progress." The corridor dimmed. The next door appeared, unmarked. Its frame was cracked, bleeding faint light into the dark. Eleanor's voice was low. "That's the door no one opens twice." Daniel reached for the handle anyway. The unmarked door opened soundlessly. No hinges, no creak, just a long exhale, as if the air itself had been waiting for centuries. Beyond it stretched a vast, colorless plain. No horizon, no sky. Only ground made of parchment, stitched together from a billion overlapping pages. Every step Daniel took left an inked footprint, words blooming beneath his feet, sentences rearranging as he passed. At the center of that infinite expanse stood a table, and on it, one book, the first ledger. It pulsed faintly, bound in something that was not leather, not cloth, something alive. Eleanor followed him, though her presence felt thinner here, like a reflection trying to stay attached to a body that no longer existed. "This is where it began," she said. "The first bargain. The first trade where man learned how to own another man, and call it progress." Daniel stepped closer. On the open page, he saw not ink, but blood, dark, ancient, still moving, pulsing with memory. The writing wasn't in English, or any language he knew. It looked like geometry, like the architecture of power itself. "Who wrote it?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes flickered toward the plain. "Not one person. All of them. Every generation that discovered profit could be born from hierarchy. They all added a line, a clause, a signature, and it never stopped." The text rearranged itself beneath his gaze, forming words he could now read. "By debt we bind. By name we erase. By blood we own." Daniel's breath caught. "It's not just history," he whispered. "It's a spell." Eleanor nodded. "Language that became law. Law that became empire. Empire that became economy. Every contract since then has been a translation of this." The book began to hum. The pages rippled outward like disturbed water, and faces appeared within the paper. Brief flashes of human memory. Slaves, soldiers, clerks, investors, presidents. Each one repeated, ting the same 3 words. "Keep the balance." Eleanor touched the edge of the ledger. Her skin smoked where it met the page. "If you read too long," she warned, "you don't just see the history, you become part of it. Daniel stared at her hand dissolving into ink. Then why show me this? Because someone has to finish what I couldn't. The archive can't be destroyed by fire or force. It must be rewritten by one who understands both sides, power and pain, the scribe and the slave. The pages began to lift as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. A voice filled the air. Not male, not female, not human. The next line is yours, Daniel. He looked down at the quill in his hand, the same one that had bound him before. Only this time, the ink inside shimmered gold. Eleanor's form was fading. Choose carefully, she whispered. Whatever you write becomes law for the next age. He raised the quill. The ground trembled. The blood on the pages hissed. And then, silence. Daniel took a breath, looked into the endless white, and began to write. The first stroke of Daniel's quill tore through silence like thunder. It wasn't sound. It was reversal. Every letter he formed unspooled something old and unholy. Chains dissolved in echoes. Ledgers burned from the inside out. But with every word, 1,000 other records shifted, seeking to restore their balance. The parchment beneath his feet began to tremble. The plane itself seemed alive, rewriting to defend itself. Where he wrote freedom, the page countered with law. Where he wrote truth, it answered with order. Where he wrote mercy, it whispered, "Debt sustains the world." Eleanor's fading voice lingered beside him. It doesn't want to die, Daniel. It's not evil. It's hungry. Every system built on it depends on its survival. Every economy, every throne, every history book. You're not just rewriting words. You're starving gods. He pressed harder. The ink bled gold across the page, igniting the ground in lines of living light. Faces rose up again. Bankers, kings, priests, CEOs, all crying out in protest, their mouths moving in perfect unison. Undo him. Undo the scribe. Daniel's body began to fracture into light and shadow. The quill in his hand vibrated violently, the air around him distorting with each word. He saw the modern world flickering in and out of existence. Skyscrapers turning into plantation houses. Stock markets dissolving into auction blocks. Digital servers humming like fields at harvest. The past and present collided, revealing what they had always been. Two halves of the same lie. He could feel the ledger fighting back, trying to pull him in. Its voice thundered now, layered and ancient. You cannot unwrite profit. You can only redistribute it. Daniel gritted his teeth, his hand shaking. Then I'll change the definition. And with one final stroke, he wrote a single line across the page. No value without memory. The ledger screamed. The parchment, not world convulsed, folding inward, collapsing into a single point of light. Daniel was thrown backward, weightless, through centuries collapsing like glass. He saw wars blink out, borders fade, debts vanish. But for every life freed, another life flickered uncertainly. People forgetting their pasts, their names, their histories. Eleanor's face appeared one last time in the storm of light. Every correction costs something, she whispered. Be ready to pay. And then, darkness. A silence so complete, it felt like the first second after creation. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was lying in a field of tall grass. No ledger, no Eleanor. Just sunlight, too bright to trust. In the distance, a bell was ringing. But it wasn't a church bell. It was electronic, repeating. A notification sound. He looked down. In his hand was not a quill, but a phone. And on the screen, a single message. The archive has been updated. The grass around him swayed beneath a sky too blue, too sterile. Like a simulation trying to remember what sunlight looked like. Cars whispered by on a distant road. The world felt normal. And yet every sound, every shadow, hummed with recognition. as if reality itself remembered what he had done. Daniel sat up, still gripping the phone. The message glowed against his palm. The archive has been updated. He tapped the screen. It opened to an unfamiliar app. No name, only a white circle spinning slowly, waiting. And then words appeared. Welcome, Scribe 001. He froze. The camera flickered to life by itself. For an instant, he saw not his own reflection, but Eleanor's. She was older now, wearing modern clothes, her eyes still the same pale gray. Congratulations, she said through the static. You moved the ledger forward. But remember what I told you. Correction costs. Her image glitched, splitting into thousands of smaller windows until her voice became a chorus. Eleanor speaking through every screen, every device, every unseen network. Every click is a signature. Every post a contract. Every algorithm a seed of the archive reborn. Daniel stumbled to his feet. Around him, the modern world pulsed. Phone towers blinking like watchful eyes. Satellites tracing invisible lines overhead. Data centers breathing beneath the soil like new plantations made of code. He looked back at the phone. Notifications were multiplying. Credit score updated. Terms of service revised. You have agreed. He whispered. No, I didn't. But the device answered in Eleanor's calm, relentless tone. You always agree. That's how consent survives inside control. He began walking, the world warping around him. Billboards reshaping their text. Faces in passing cars flickering between centuries. Every logo briefly revealing the same symbol. The seal of the old ledger. He reached a city sand, skyline rising from the horizon like a mirage. It looked alive, buildings breathing in rhythm with the phone in his hand. The archive hadn't been destroyed. It had been upgraded. And somewhere deep in the global system, his single rewritten line had become a new root command. No value without memory. The words were spreading, hidden in source code, in legal fine print, in whispered fragments of forgotten history. Some systems crashed. Others awoke. A digital pulse of reckoning. For the first time, Daniel realized what Eleanor meant. The archive couldn't die. It could only change its host. And now, its host was everyone. It began as a rumor in the networks, unnoticed by most, dismissed as a glitch. Old photographs started tagging themselves with the names of people long dead. Online ledgers suddenly displayed transactions dated centuries earlier. Archived court documents rewrote their own verdicts at midnight. Somewhere, the machinery of memory had come alive. Daniel watched from the edge of the city as the first waves hit. Digital billboards flickered between ads and confessions, CEOs apologizing for empires that never should have existed, politicians reciting speeches from the wrong century. History was cross-wiring with itself, bleeding through every database, every algorithm. His phone pulsed again, soft, rhythmic. A new message. Reconciliation in progress. He could feel it even in the air. Tiny vibrations, like a low electrical heartbeat. Streetlights blinked Morse code patterns that translated to dates, locations, crimes. It was as if the world itself was being subpoenaed by its own conscience. Across the globe, people began waking from dreams that weren't theirs, memories of ancestors they had never met. A banker in London woke screaming, convinced his hand still carried the weight of a whip. A miner in Johannesburg collapsed, seeing a plantation field under a sky that wasn't there. The line Daniel had written, "No value without memory," was forcing every transaction to remember its origin. Data servers filled with impossible entries, emotional signatures, sensory echoes, ancestral debts. Economies shuddered as invisible ledgers recalculated worth, demanding restitution not in currency, but in remembrance. News anchors tried to explain it. Scientists called it a quantum contagion. But the truth was older, simpler. The archive had made remembering compulsory. No more selective history. No more convenient forgetting. Daniel walked through the streets as people gathered around Scrie ends, watching the feed of a world confessing. For some, it was liberation. For others, unbearable. He whispered to himself, I only wanted to make it honest. Eleanor's voice answered from everywhere and nowhere. Honesty and peace were never the same thing. The phone vibrated once more. A final notification. System nearing capacity. Final integration required. He looked at the message, then at the skyline pulsing like a living circuit. He knew what it meant. The archive needed a host mind large enough to hold it all, and it had already chosen him. The sky rippled like liquid glass. Every surface around Daniel, windows, puddles, phone screens, reflected not light, but information. The sum of everything humanity had ever done to survive, to dominate, to forget. He could feel the archive inside him now, whispering through bone and blood. Not in words, but in weights, the heaviness of all that memory demanding to be carried. Every debt, every name erased, every truth renamed as progress. The city lights dimmed one by one until only the glow of his phone remained. On the screen, final integration required. Below it, two options pulsed in alternating light. Accept, decline. He looked up. The skyline was flickering between centuries, gaslight to neon to something beyond. Eleanor's reflection appeared beside him once more, formed from static and dust. You can end it, she said. Let the world forget again. Restore balance. Let memory sleep. Daniel's throat tightened. And if I accept? Then every mind will carry the record. No more myths. No more innocence. Just the weight of what we are. That would destroy us. She smiled faintly. Or make us human for the first time. The ground trembled. Data storms rolled over the horizon like digital thunderclouds. He thought of the fields, the ledgers, the cries that had built the modern skyline. All the stories buried under convenience. He had seen the cost of forgetting and the cost of knowing. Both unbearable. The screen pulsed again. Choice expiring. Daniel whispered. Then let memory choose. He placed the phone on the ground and stepped back. The device rose slowly into the air, surrounded by a halo of fractured light. The two options merged into one. Accepted. A blinding surge raced across the city, through networks, satellites, servers. Screens everywhere filled with faces, ancient, modern, unborn, all remembering together for the first time. And then, silence. When the light faded, Daniel was gone. Only his shadow remained, etched into the grass like a signature burned into history. Above it, the phone lay still. The screen read, Archive successfully distributed, version 1.0, human memory. Somewhere, a child looked up from her tablet, seeing an image she didn't recognize, a man writing in light. She asked her mother, Who is he? Her mother smiled, not sure why tears came to her eyes. I think, she said softly, that's the one who remembered. And the world kept turning, no longer innocent, not yet redeemed, but awake. Rain hammered the windows like impatient fingers. Eleanor's silhouette flickered in the candlelight, her eyes alive with something between pity and resolve. She walked to the desk, swept the scattered papers into a pile and laid the damp ledger flat between them. The ink still shimmered faintly, refusing to dry. I didn't build the archive to hide, she said. I built it to give the truth a shape men couldn't erase. But I never meant for it to wake. Daniel stared at the page where his name bled into the parchment. Wake, he whispered. The ledgers were meant to hold memory, not breath. But when we catalogued every sin, every transaction, We gave the past a pulse, and now it's feeding. She pulled a folded document from her coat pocket, yellowed, sealed with wax stamped in the shape of the spiral. This is the first covenant, she said, signed in 1712 by 3 hands, the priest, the banker, and your ancestor. It's the contract that bound every descendant to the system they created. One family to account, another to record, and one to conceal. I was born into the last. Daniel's mind reeled. You're saying this was deliberate? That all of this, your life, mine, was written? Eleanor nodded. Written, but not finished. That's why you were brought here. Every few generations, the archive calls a signatory to reconcile the balance. The last one refused. He vanished. You took his place the moment you touched that page. She turned the covenant toward him. The signatures had faded, but beneath them, in faint ink, were newer marks, updated entries, spanning centuries. Daniel recognized his father's initials, and his grandfather's, all written in the same trembling script. Your family didn't just benefit from the first debt, she said. They protected it. Each generation signed their silence. Daniel's stomach turned. And you? What are you? A confessor? A keeper? I was supposed to destroy the records when my time came, she answered. Instead, I expanded them. I wanted proof. I thought exposure would break the cycle, but it only strengthened it. The archive doesn't fear light. It feeds on attention. Every revelation makes it more real. The candle sputtered, and for an instant the walls seemed to pulse, breathing, flexing, alive with faint whispering voices. Eleanor stepped close enough that Daniel could smell the rain in her hair. There's one way left, she said, to rewrite the debt. But it requires 2 signatures, yours and mine. One bound by blood, the other by burden. Daniel met her eyes. And if I refuse? She closed the ledger gently, as though laying a child to rest. Then the archive will write the ending itself, and history will start again.